Welcome back to Ready for Merge, the podcast about the evolution of Bitcoin and Ethereum. I'm your host, Christine D. Kim. Today's show is the last Meet the Devs interview from the Substack vaults. I saved the best one for last. This is my interview with Nethermind developer Ben Adams. Ben Adams is a top contributor to the Nethermind codebase. Nethermind is one of the most popular Ethereum execution layer clients next to Geth. The last I checked, Nethermind is almost at parity, if not at parity, in terms of adoption with Geth. And in this interview, Ben shares his crypto journey on how he went from being a crypto skeptic to a believer in Ethereum and Ethereum's vision for changing the world. Before we get started with today's show, one quick announcement. If you're interested in sponsoring an upcoming Ready for Merge episode and speaking directly to an audience of protocol developers, researchers, and enthusiasts, please do reach out via the email in the show notes of today's episode. This show is going on a summer break starting next month, so there's really not many chances left before the fall if you want to get your message out there, so do reach out. Now, onwards with the interview with Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Adams. I'm a Ethereum core developer at Nethermind.
And Ben, what would you say has been your biggest contribution to the Ethereum protocol so far in your career?
I would say it's really many and varied because I've only been working on Nethermind for, I think it might be just over 2 years. And in that time, I've gone from obviously not being a contributor to number 3 contributor in terms of the number of changes I've made to the client. So I would say it's hard to pin down anyone in particular. Although, there's things like rewarming, optimizing everything, changing it to use the latest features of modern processors, AVX 512.
In the span of 2 years, going from like no contributions to being the third most prolific contributor for Nethermind, that's a big leap.
Yeah, so the only ones above me are Tomasz, who's number 1, because he started like 2019, and then Łukasz, he's been working on it quite a long time. So yeah, I think it's quite an achievement.
Sidebar, is Łukasz still on vacation or is he going to come back at some point?
Yeah, he comes back September. He's
Nice.
just taken a long time off. Although he occasionally pops in and reviews pull requests and gives opinions about things. It mostly seems he's just not attending any meetings.
It must be hard to pull away. So let's go back to your life before 2023, before you joined the Nethermind team. Ben, what were you doing? What was your life? What were you focused on before Ethereum?
So as I mentioned, I've always been focused on improving the performance of things. That's been like a common theme that's just run through everything I've done. But going way back, I used to work at Experian, which is a sort of consumer credit reference marketing data broker. They like suck all this information in about people and do things. And I became head of innovation in marketing, and I was, working on predictive analytics. This was before social media, but during the internet, and definitely before AI. And then I kind of had a midlife crisis where I felt what I was doing wasn't positive for the world. And so at that point, I quit and started working on massively multiplayer online games. The first thing I worked on was Illyriad, um, which is like a browser-based online game, but the civilization, um, but for thousands of players playing together all at once. And then from there, we tried to do a second game, Age of Ascent, where we were almost broke the world record at the time for number of concurrent players in a single game. And as part of that, again, it was sort of performance I was working on, and that's where I sort of spilled into open source work. So some of the things I wanted to do in Age of Ascent were sort of held back by tools we were using. So I started contributing to .NET and C#, which are like the languages and tools I use. So, I mean, this is also a theme of going deeper and deeper into the platforms I use, which might become clear on how I ended up working on Ethereum as a core dev. But yeah, so I started contributing through open source to Microsoft. They'd recently open sourced .NET and ASP.NET, and so I started contributing to that, and then I became a board member of the .NET Foundation, sort of guiding its development. But yeah, so there I was trying to improve improve the performance of the runtime. And that's sort of what I was working on. I mean, it's still working on Illyriad, but then I also was massively anti-crypto, because since I am like highly focused on the performance of things, I only knew sort of the Bitcoin story really. And to me, it was like an anathema of everything I was for. It was like literally a protocol that was designed to increasingly get more and more inefficient over time. So the hash rate going up in order to secure it and using more and more energy to do the same amount of work is like to me, it's a terrible thing. It's like you're literally making something that becomes less and less efficient over time. So yeah, and then a friend of mine was like, "Oh no, you've got to have a look at like Ethereum and some of the EVM stuff, because that you can actually write programs and they run." And I was like, "No." Eventually, I got into using BNB chain, which was more aligned at the time, because this was pre-merge, because it didn't work on hash rate. So although it's very centralized comparison to Ethereum, but take of me as a not knowing much about crypto at the time. And then I started trading lots of shit coins that turned out to be rug pulls, and then I started like trying to understand why I kept getting wrecked. And from there I started reading smart contract code on like BNB scan and things. And then after that, I started writing Solidity, and I've deployed probably like 180 smart contracts on various CVM chains. But I wanted to know a bit deeper, how did it work? Essentially BNB execution is the same as Ethereum execution, more or less. And so I was trying to read various execution clients' code, and I came across Nethermind. And Nethermind was written in .NET, C#, which is like my lingua franca, as it were. So yeah, so I started reading that code base, and it's all open source. on GitHub. And then as I was reading it, I was like, oh well, you could improve this, you could improve that. So I started submitting PRs, changes to their code base. And I think I did that for like 3 or 4 months. Just essentially from reading the code. So and then they got in contact with me and they were like, do you wanna do this? You know, um, as a thing. Um, and by that time, I'd had like 32 or 39 PRs merged to the Nethermind code base. And I wasn't a core developer. I was just, a random on the internet, um, just seeing things that could be improved. So I thought I'd improve them. And yeah, and that's how essentially I joined Nethermind.
That's so in line with the open source ethos of uh, contributing and developing on Ethereum, that, somebody is curious about this technology and everything is open source. So they start looking at the code base on GitHub. They notice these like various improvements that can be made. And, after the course of, for you, it was a couple months, pretty short. Others, maybe years, but they start contributing. And then before they know it, it's their full-time job.
Yeah, completely. I mean, open source is just so powerful. Um, and I mean, it depends what your motivations are, obviously. But I'm just curious and I like improving things. So, and as I say, I contributed to the .NET runtime as an external non Microsoft employee for many years. So yeah, it just seemed a natural thing to help and improve.
I want to ask a few questions about that life before Ethereum, before you started contributing to um, the Nethermind code base, before you got interested and started deploying a bunch of smart contracts on BNB chain. You had mentioned that your first kind of major role, correct me if I'm wrong, was head of marketing. How did
Um,
you?
no, it was head of innovation in and that was in the marketing division of Experian. So I was come up with new products, new ideas, um, and it was sort of a saddle between the sort of the business side and the technical side. Um, so I make prototypes and see what we could do with data and all that. But that was just
Yeah.
where it was all, to me, the data brokering thing was starting to change, and it was like rather than um, the amount of data that was coming in from the internet, rather than just other ambient data and trying to predict people's behaviors and all that sort of stuff. And it's just got worse since then. Like it's massive privacy invasion. So that just didn't sit right with me.
Yeah, I feel like that's a huge like axiom of value in the crypto industry, trying to improve the privacy of end users, because it is so it's kind of so messed up now in 2025.
Yeah, and
Then
I mean,
yeah.
Ethereum, as I came to understand it more, I mean, I found that the it's aligned to me and my outlook on life more than I imagined, in terms of what it's trying to achieve. Yeah. So that was a synergy that I hadn't realized existed, which I'm very happy to found.
Let's dig into that a little bit. That, I guess, value alignment with what the Ethereum technology is trying to do. You mentioned that, yeah, one of the big reasons for making that switch in your life was you didn't think what you were working on was beneficial for the world, and clearly now you do. Yeah, on the topic of privacy, like Ethereum is still very, it's not as good for privacy, I would say, as some other chains like Bitcoin, because of how public the accounts are, how public all of your transactions are. On the topic of efficiency, because Ethereum is proof of stake, it becomes more capital inefficient over time because you need far more capital. For security to increase, you need just more capital locked and at stake. Can you talk a little bit more about like why Ethereum as a technology aligns with your values and like some of the things that I just mentioned around privacy and around efficiency?
I mean, it's not like a privacy chain, obviously. Um, so yeah, it's not, and all the transactions are obviously very open. Um, and since it went from, I mean, I do understand mining had an interesting property where it could create pristine Ethereum that didn't exist and wasn't linked to anything before. And now that we are in proof of stake, every bit of Ethereum has been um, pristine, non-linked to anything. Ethereum has been like created, as it were. So any issuance that occurs on Ethereum will be linked to a validator, etc. So there is obviously a large privacy issue there. Um, However, the leadership and also all the developers and everyone is aligned behind privacy is important. So okay, we're not at the end state yet, and it's hard to know exactly what the right form of privacy, um, what shape that would take. But it is important, and everybody that's part of the protocol believes that. Although I think the priority is more like um, the first one would be censorship resistance. That's the first step, and so you have that credible neutrality. Then privacy is a goal on top of that. But yeah, it's obviously not there yet. Uh, Sorry, what was the second point? Oh, in terms of capital and efficiency. I mean, there is sort of, yes, in terms of there is that issue with proof of stake where, it could gather, there is a potentially a centralizing force, although that is also in a way um, balanced by, it's not an on-chain governance system. It's not, people don't vote with their Ethereum to say how things should develop and change. It's like a broad consensus of many different participants. A large staker couldn't say, you need to add this to Ethereum, you need to change Ethereum in this way and force it to happen. So I don't think there's that, like the social consensus is a very powerful feature of how the protocol develops. Um,
Yeah.
and in and in terms of people using Ethereum, well, then the staking, once you have censorship resistance, etc., the staking of ETH itself isn't so important as to, if you deploy a DApp or a token or whatever that's using, it has its own DAO or some form of decentralized governance. That's not affected by the Ethereum stake, if that makes sense. Or if you create an L2 or
Yeah, there's still like a level of permissionlessness to the kind of code that you can deploy. And as long as there's like a very small subset of honest validators, like your transactions, your code will eventually be executed, kind of thing.
yeah. So if there's a DAO voting or deciding they want to do something using their application or their tokens or whatever, what what the Ethereum proof of stake is doing is kind of irrelevant to them. So, it doesn't, as long as we have that censorship resistance and, um, yeah, that kind of thing, which is
Yeah,
obviously very important.
Yeah, I think that like the values of privacy, the values of censorship resistance, these decentralization. These are, like you said, are collectively very strongly held in Ethereum and the crypto industry at large. But there's like these differences in opinion of how to best achieve these values. Even within Ethereum, questions about, to what extent should a code change like Fossil be prioritized in an upgrade, to the extent that scalability and UX is a value. Like there's so many differing opinions on how to get there. You mentioned one key kind of like term in the consensus forming of that, and that is like the quote unquote leadership. How would you define who the leadership is in Ethereum? And how would you define like the role of client developers in comparison to leadership?
Um, I mean, the leadership or governance of Ethereum is very varied, and I think is decentralized in and of itself. And for instance, you can see the fact EOF got cancelled, even though we, as core devs, almost unanimously, there were some against it, but almost unanimously were for it. Um, but there was a lot of pushback from the community saying, this isn't what we want. This isn't the thing you should be focusing on. I mean, I'm a little bit sad about that, but it's a bit soon. Um, but yeah, so when I say leadership, I don't mean like the Ethereum Foundation. They they help guide, coordinate. I'd say they're more coordinators than necessarily the leadership. Um, and obviously, Vitalik has an influence on it because I mean that's just I think at this stage it's just because he's hugely intelligent and like his ideas are very good, rather than necessarily he can force the core devs to do anything particular. So he has, many EIPs that have been rejected, as well. So it is a very decentralized government. I think if there was some on-chain governance, in terms of people voting with stake, then we'd suddenly have a problem where it's this strong centralizing force that just takes into account, uh, who has the most money rather than, what are the principles as a collective we're trying to achieve. As to the core devs, I mean, the strongest power they probably have is like a veto power. But to prevent progress in a way, because they're obviously the people that are implementing the protocol. So at the strongest level, they could say we're not going to implement this. But if it was just one client, um, and the other client said they were going to implement it, then they could, if it was important enough, controversial enough. Sorry, not controversial. Um, then obviously that would still go in, and the other client would like get forked out. So the fact there's this client diversity, that there's nobody in control of the protocol essentially.
I'm glad you mentioned client diversity because that's something else I wanted to bring up with you. Nethermind is what last I checked clientdiversity.com, Nethermind is at par with the adoption of Guest, which is quite a significant achievement. Guest as the like uh, for a long time in the early history of Ethereum, Geth was really the only main client implementation for Ethereum, the protocol. And it is the implementation that was the earliest, that is funded and supported by the Ethereum Foundation. Now, though, the Nethermind client is as I would say arguably well funded and well resourced. It in terms of adoption, it is on, like I said, on par with Geth. What do you think the role of the Nethermind client is specifically in the evolution of Ethereum? Do you think that the Nethermind client um, has a much larger say in the direction of the Ethereum protocol um, because of its adoption?
Um, yes and no. Um, I mean, you've attended many all core dev schools, so I don't think anyone's really got a forcing function on anything other than as I say an element of veto in terms of saying, this is completely against what we're about. We're not going to implement it. And then obviously there would be some drama. I think from the time I've been at Nethermind, all voices seem to be well listened to at all core devs execution anyway.
Based on your values and based on what you've shared thus far in this interview, is there a decision or is there like a code change or a particular event that you think would make you like step away from the Ethereum project and think, I gotta do something else?
Yeah, because I think Ethereum is like it's a global, it's a worldwide protocol. So I think if there was government capture, that would be problematic. If there was something forced on the protocol. Now I don't know what form that would take. If it was like there was some regulation and it was harmless and you know a slight change and it'd be compliant with something, that's one thing. But if it was, um, like the Roman Storm trial is a concerning thing. Um, but if and obviously there is a trend for governments um, around the world, certainly Western governments, to want to increase surveillance, um, have backdoors to encryption, all this sort of stuff. And if we were changing Ethereum to support that direction, I would, that wouldn't sit with me.
I want to dig a little bit deeper into your career history. Specifically on the topic of your technical skills as a developer. So some of the developers that I've had in the series um, lean a little bit more, have leaned a little bit more in their past to the more business side of development rather than like the technical programming side. You mentioned that when you were head of innovation, uh, you were doing a bit of both, like business and development. Can you talk about how your developer skills, your programming skills have evolved over the years? And like what particular programming skills would you say you really had to learn on the job of being a full-time Nethermind client developer?
I mean, I went to university and did computer science because back in the day when the advice was don't do this, it's not, I don't know if you can make a career of it. This was a long time ago.
What year are
And
we talking? Like how long ago?
1995 or something. So it was like just a bit before the dot-com boom. Um, and before everybody was trying to do computer science. But yeah, so my school was like, no, 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 you wanna do something like physics or something more hard science. But my view was no matter what I'm gonna do, the way the world is going, we will be using computers to do it. So, going back to me going deeper into everything, I thought, I might as well just, start at the bottom and do do computers, since everything in the future will be running on computers. Well, that was my view. Not a lot of the world shared it at the time. And then, yeah, it sort of got in. So I've been programming and then, dabbling with management and so forth as they go up, because that was back at that time. In order to advance, they didn't have things like individual contributors. You would have to go into a sort of a management track in order to um, advance, really. Um, but that, in a way, was also where I started, I had an interest in open source. It was like, well, I do these things during the day, but I really like programming, so I can do open source work, and that's like keeping the hand in programming. Yeah, so in terms of what I had to learn, I mean, I obviously needed to learn the Ethereum protocol and how everything worked, and it's like, a massive, massive code base. Um, but it did play to all my sweet spots, and I've been programming for like, I'd say 30 years now. So I do have quite quite a deep knowledge of yeah. I think my life has been trying to always return to programming, from being pulled towards managing people, and then trying to get back to the programming, because it's what I really enjoy.
Mm. And it is more of a thing now, especially the individual contributorship, especially with open source projects. How much of your day to day today as an Ethereum, Ethereum core developer, how much of it is programming versus other projects? Like, could you describe, what you're doing on an average day?
Um, so I probably wake up. I have like Nethermind logs, all the data logs on a screen 24/7. So the first thing I'd normally do when I wake up is I check the logs to see whether what's been going on. Then I'll check the uh my Grafana dashboard to see, what if there are any weird things that have happened that I want to drill into. Um, which sometimes there are, um, and then I'll check like Slack, company Slack, um, see if there's anything urgent there. Then I'll probably have a look at the Daily Gwei Discord to see what people have been talking about. Maybe check price. Um, yeah, and then I'll probably take a snapshot of a profiling session of my running Nethermind instance, and then sort of drill into that, see if there's any um, hotspots that jump out at me as something I can work on. If not, I'll see what tasks I'm supposed to be doing and any side tasks I've got going on. Like recently, I've done another Mind UI, which is I hope people like. It'll be in the next release, but that was just sort of like a side project that I was doing in my own time. But yeah, mostly I would say, aside from having many meetings, is programming or doing research into programming. So, obviously, Ethereum R&D, Discord, hacking EIPs, writing EIPs, that sort of stuff as well.
Shout out to the Daily Gwei. I love that that's part of the routine. Um, are there any parts of like your role as another Mind client developer that you like wish you had more time for or that you had less of in your day?
No, I'm pretty content actually. I found this is something I found with working on Ethereum. It's like I've found my calling. So
Wow.
I'm very happy about it. It took, as I say, it took like 30 years, but I'm here.
Well, I think that really leads to this next question because the series is really about how people become Ethereum client developers. And it's amazing that, you said that this is like you found your calling. If would you say that the best way to get involved, especially with the Nethermind client, is it still to just like jump into the GitHub, start like contributing in people's spare time there?
Yeah, so there's the Nethermind internship program. I don't know whether it's still on at the moment, but um it's on periodically where like we have loads of people joining for a short period of time. And that's not necessarily just Ethereum core dev because Nethermind does a whole bunch of lots and lots of things. There's like 300 plus people in Nethermind. Um, and but it is an interesting um internal structure in terms of any other company I've worked for, where it's kind of I don't know if this comes from Ethereum, but it's kind of inverted, where essentially like interns are like pitched projects, and it's like, do you want to work on this? Do you want to work on this? Rather than you have to. This is what you're working on. And that also happens a little bit in product where we have all these EIPs we've got to implement, and it's like, well, who wants to take what? You know what I mean? Obviously, if it turned out that they weren't all covered, then people would be you know asked to look at things. But it generally works in I wouldn't say a bottom up way, but it's in this we have managers and things that fill out forms and stuff to make sure everything's working smoothly. I don't want to denigrate their role. Um, but yeah, in terms of how I came to work for Nethermind, I mean, I don't see why that wouldn't work for others if they make good contributions. Obviously, it wasn't like I did two. I did say it was like 39 changes that I had made before they got into contact with me and were like, we'd like to keep this going. But yeah, I mean, Ethereum, all the clients, I mean, even um, the DApps and the entire ecosystem. Most of it is open source. Most of it, is very one of the big things is you can just do things. The amount of agency you have as a person, you can just do things and you'll be accepted. There isn't like there isn't it isn't too gatekeepery if that if you're making a difference, um, then you just get accepted for it.
100%. It speaks also to the decentralization of Ethereum because I think in other ecosystems, you may need the approval of a foundation or the approval of certain key people to really get started or get going with your project. Whereas I do agree with you that with Ethereum and its ecosystem, there's nobody who really controls the protocol or the direction of the protocol or what picks up traction, what doesn't pick up traction, other than truly the merit of whatever it is you're doing and its benefit to the protocol.
Yeah, entirely, entirely. And I think that's quite amazing.
Yeah. And hopefully it continues. Uh, Ben, I wanted to end off our interview with a couple of rapid fire questions. These are questions where I'm hoping you can just say what pops into your mind initially. Don't think too long on these. And and the aim is to move through these questions fast.
Okay.
So get ready. Whatever pops into your head at first.
All right, let's see.
Okay, let's get started with these rapid fire questions. The first one is, what do you like most about Ethereum protocol development?
Um, yeah, the decentralization, the ideas, the weird and wonderful things, and seeing what it enables and what people do with it.
What do you dislike the most?
Um, there are some fights. The FUD, the the untruths that are, like on crypto Twitter that come out, especially like if price is doing badly. Apparently that changes what arguments are valid and what aren't. But
Yeah.
you know, the fundamentals haven't changed. So it's a bit strange.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to the next question, but I just wanted to say, like, I think also the price puts a lot of pressure on, like, the market conditions sometimes can put a lot of pressure and negatively impact, like, I don't know, sometimes like the mood of the developer community.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that since we were talking about how Nethermind has improved in terms of adoption, I think I would have hated to be in like the Geth team when they were like 95% of the protocol because the levels of stress then would have been enormous.
Yeah,
In terms of
100%.
like if you make any bug or any, I mean, obviously the testing that goes on is absolutely huge, and there's I think probably shout out to PandaOps, um, is probably 75% of a fork is like testing. But yeah, since there's so much value and there's so many things depend on it, and also now the mantra of 100% uptime. Sorry, you said quick fire.
No, but you
But
said something that was interesting, and I wanted to dig a little deeper into it. Okay, but back to the rapid fire questions. What's an area of protocol development that you wish that more people would start contributing to? Any areas of underserved kind of protocol development that you wish there were more eyes on?
privacy, obviously. I mean, everybody says, you know, one of the most important or features of Ethereum is privacy, and it isn't really, it isn't really there. There are all sorts of ideas, but there's nothing implemented. There are obviously protocols that have been implemented on um, Ethereum that give you privacy, like for instance, Tornado Cash, but obviously that's got some concerning trials going on about it. So
What do you think is the most necessary character trait to be an Ethereum client developer?
I think persistence, um, just and attention to detail helps quite a bit. Um,
The attention to detail reminds me of like the configurations for like precompiles or like the fork IDs, like especially when you're implementing an upgrade, making sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted in the actual like release. That floated to my mind when you said that.
yeah, we did have
Like the chain ID.
tech, texture. We did have a little bit of a miss on practically all the test beds, even though it
Yeah.
was like it was quite a minor thing. But I mean, it shows you, what a big impact such a minor configuration um, mistake can make. Uh, and also shows you how remarkable 100% uptime is.
Yeah. The devil is in the details. Okay, last two rapid fire questions. What's one thing that you wish somebody told you about jumping into Ethereum, working as a full-time client developer that you wish they told you before you got into it?
Yeah, you can just do things. 100%. There's no barrier to entry. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. It doesn't matter your level of um uh skill or knowledge. Yeah, if you're willing to put the effort in, um you can do anything.
Last rapid fire question. If you weren't working on Ethereum, is there another open source project that you would want to work on? And if so, what is it?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, so as I say, I did work on the .NET runtime and C# for a while, which is like pretty low level um, stuff. So in a way, I've kind of scratched that itch, I think. But yeah, there would probably be many things. I mean, I do periodically wander around GitHub and like fix things that I find. So there was like there's a project called IL GPU, which was you can compile C# to run on a GPU, and I thought about I was wondering if we could use that to implement the EVM in Nethermind, and yeah, I just started making random PRs to their repository as I was looking at the code and trying things out. But yeah, it's all on GitHub, and you can just contribute to anything. It's amazing what the open source world is, and it's so powerful.
100%. Thank you so much for the time, Ben. I really appreciated listening to your story.
Thank you. Good to talk.
Thank you for joining me on another episode of Ready for Merge. This was the last Meet the Devs interview from my Substack vaults. I had recorded a batch of these interviews last year as a premium offering for my Substack subscribers. Now that the full series is out and fully public on all Ready for Merge podcast channels, you can actually watch the full playlist of Meet the Devs interviews on the Ready for Merge YouTube channel. The playlist on YouTube will include all of the Meet the Devs interviews that I recorded for my Substack and new ones that I've recorded exclusively for the Ready for Merge podcast. Next week's show is going to be a bi-weekly brief on Bitcoin and Ethereum development, as well as other protocol news. It's going to be the last bi-weekly brief of season 1 of Ready for Merge. As mentioned, the show is going to go on a summer hiatus at the end of this month, and it will be returning in the fall. So do stay tuned for next week's episode. Thanks again for listening. Until next time. Bye, everyone.